From Flourish DX School, this is the Flourishing at School podcast. With mental health becoming a global priority, we are your partner for creating schools where students, teachers and school leaders feel good and function well, becoming the best versions of themselves and contributing to a flourishing world.
Welcome to the Flourishing at School podcast. I'm Tamara Lechner. Each week, my co-host Jason Van Schie and I bring you the best practitioners, academics, and everything in between to inform best practice in whole school mental health. Jason, I think we're both at home this week, which is pretty unusual. So instead of asking, where in the world are you? I'm thinking seasonally. In Victoria today, we had snow, which we never get. And it got me thinking that you're ramping up to your warmer season. And I wondered if you had a well-being practice that's seasonal, that you only practice at certain times of the year.
You're really stumping me. We're going to run out of what is Jason doing for his well-being ideas. Look, you're right, it is warming up. It's already 26 degrees and it's only 7 a.m. in Perth. So it's going to be a warm one today. Look, I do like to swim when I have the time, and definitely easier to get up and get to the pool early when it's summer and it's light and warm outside rather than going in winter. So, I haven't done it yet, Tamara, but you might have inspired me to get down to the pool in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I like that. And we're the opposite, with 1 degree happening here today and de-icing of planes and all of that stuff that accompanies winter. I try to do a little bit of I never know if you say heggy or higgy, that warm practice where I light candles and bundle up and I feel like I'm hibernating. And that's how I'm taking care of my well-being, full hibernation mode. So I'm delighted to introduce our next guest, Marnie Thomas. And Marnie, we were talking to Marnie before we started recording, and she embodies flourishing and well-being. If you are listening to the podcast, you're going to have to pop on over to our YouTube channel and see how beautiful Marnie is. So Marnie, before I let you talk about your well-being practice, I want to tell everybody that we know you from Newcastle Grammar School. You are the head of positive education and you come from a background of teaching English, and you have your master's of applied positive psychology from Melbourne Uni. You are a top visible well-being teacher, and I want to unpack that and hear more about that. And you also are big on the strength-based approach in schools and well-being literacy. So welcome, Marnie.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, Tamara. Hi, Jason. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you very much.
And Marnie, I agree with Tamara. Our listeners have to go to YouTube and check out what you're wearing today and your background. It's very bright and colourful, just like your personality.
Thank you very much. I believe in making wellbeing visible, and what better way than with rainbows?
Well, yes. So, Marnie, can you Tamara's given us a bit of a background on how you've gotten to where you are and what you do. But maybe in a few minutes, you could give us a background of your career today.
Sure, absolutely. I feel as if I was destined for the classroom. I've always loved stories and I love people. I have a relationship focus, so I feel as if schools were always the place for me. I began my teaching career in quite a challenging context. And it was definitely where not only I learnt best practice in pedagogy, but where I really started to think about my own well-being and how to nourish that, and what were some of the strategies and interventions that I needed for myself in the workplace. And then I started thinking about how can I make the experience the best that it possibly can be for my students. So I had about 6 years in a really challenging environment. I was only 20 when I started teaching, and I was teaching 18-year-olds in the Year 12 classroom. So it was really challenging. It was my first year out of home. I went to a really gorgeous place in Western Sydney that challenged me in every possible way, but it really encouraged me to learn those skills and those practices and apply those interventions into my own life so that I could be the best teacher that I could be. I guess, too, I was a positive psychology practitioner without knowing it. I didn't have a language for it when I was starting out as a beginning teacher in those foundational years, but I was applying a strengths-based approach without really knowing that's what I was doing. So that's how I got started. I've always been interested, as I said, in stories and in people, and relationships are just central, not only to teaching, but relationships really, the quality of our relationships determine the quality of our lives. So I then moved to Newcastle and had my first beautiful baby boy. I have 3 boys now. And here I am at Newcastle Grammar School, making, as you said, wellbeing visible with my rainbows every single day for this beautiful community. But I stay in touch with those students that I first started out with. So I feel really fortunate to be in the position that I am, because I've had those experiences whereby I've been able to learn about my own wellbeing and then hopefully walk with young people as they try to optimize their wellbeing as well.
I love that you talked about challenges, and that often for so many is the beginning of our journey with this work. And I think I'm very similar to you, that I backwards changed my way to positive psychology. I was already doing this stuff and I just wondered why I felt I was feeling good and functioning well compared to other people. I had a daughter with autism, and most of the moms were not thriving, and I was. And so I became really curious to understand. And so similar to you, I backwards changed. So you talked about challenge, but on the other end of that spectrum is what we call flourishing, and we're at the Flourishing at School podcast. So I wonder if you could tell us how you define flourishing and connect it to everybody in a school.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I can define flourishing perhaps without defining wellbeing first. I think for me, and I just heard you, Tamara, mention functioning well and feeling good. So for us, or for me personally, I feel as if wellbeing is feeling good, functioning well, but also doing good, putting that other person focus into the definition. So if we're defining wellbeing as feeling good, functioning well, and doing good, hopefully then flourishing would be the goal. That's what we're working towards. I also want to note, though, that as you mentioned with challenge, I think that flourishing is that beautiful symbiotic relationship between struggle and strength. I know those two things can coexist, and it's really important that we understand that there is no joy without sadness, that light and shade makes up our lives. So for me, that's what flourishing is. It's that beautiful relationship between struggle and strength, but it's also just that capacity for all of us to live our truth. If I'm able to live my truth and other people are able to live theirs, and we're able to acknowledge that light and shade in our lives, then hopefully we will be well on our way to feeling good, functioning well, and doing good.
That's a great way to look at it. Often people, when I talk about positive psychology or positive education, they're like, oh, it's like, we're always happy and, we can never be sad. But that light and shade, right? It's life. But how can we spend more time in that positive, or have tools when we are feeling in those shade moments to get back out of that and into the light again?
Absolutely, Jason. And when I think about when I first started teaching in a really challenging context, I realized that just fundamentally we're humans, and our lives are going to be made up of those struggles and strengths. And for some of us, there may be more struggles at certain points, but it's really important to acknowledge both of those things. And now I've been able to study the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology. I'm well aware of that construction of positive psychology as a happyology. And I think that it's really important that we acknowledge that it is about the struggle, and it is also about the strength, and the way that we can bring those things together and adopting some strategies in our lives whereby hopefully we can be working towards a strengths-based approach.
Yeah, terrific. Now, Marnie, I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about your positive education and visible wellbeing approaches, and the ways that you build wellbeing literacy in student, staff, and the wider school community.
Oh, absolutely. You've just mentioned some of my favourite things. I love talking about wellbeing literacy. Mind you, my students would tell you I just love talking. I'm an English teacher, so I love stories. Our positive education approach is built around Professor Lee Waters' visible wellbeing approach. So we're a partner Visible Wellbeing School. So we use the SEARCH framework, which is strengths, emotional management, attention and awareness, relationships, coping, and habits and goals. So that's the framework that we use for whole school wellbeing, for flourishing at Newcastle Grammar School from K to 12. But I guess what underpins that, though, is wellbeing literacy. So it's the application of wellbeing science, and it's being aware that the greatest tool that we have in terms of promoting whole school wellbeing and community wellbeing is language. For us, we know that wellbeing exists in language, and the more that we can engage our community, our students, our staff in a shared language, the more we're going to be able to walk together on that journey towards flourishing. So our positive education approach is underpinned by wellbeing science. As I said before, we understand that our lives are going to be made up of sunshine and storms, but having that language, that shared language, and for us it starts with strengths. So the VIA character strengths are for us that shared language, and it's embodied from kindy all the way through to our parents. It's actually incredibly joyful to hear kindergarten students talking about their strengths and thinking through what the absence of a strength might look like. What does the excess of a strength look like? Have I overplayed? Have I underplayed? So we've really used that language throughout our entire organisation. In my role, I spend lots of time talking to students and to families, and that's the language that we use. So it's really that positive education approach that's underpinned with wellbeing science, evidence-based positive psychology interventions. We also have not only a whole school approach, we explicitly teach positive education in positive education lessons from kindy all the way through to year 10. So we believe we have both of those approaches that work really beautifully together in alignment, that whole school approach and the explicit teaching of those positive psychology interventions and theories and practices. So I'm very lucky to work at a school that makes wellbeing visible and that partners with such global leaders in this space.
Yeah, amazing.
Jason and I are both massive fans of the strengths, and we are always encouraging schools to use the strength spotting feature that we have in Flourish DX because it's a brilliant way to share out strengths across a team. And so what I want to ask you, because you have a lot, you have this kindy through 12 program, you have the parents and the teachers and everybody on board, and it sounds like you can get the curriculum, you can get the search, you've got Lee coming in. What did you recommend for a school that is just getting started, kind of that low-hanging fruit? Maybe something that worked for you that you think would work for others. What would you recommend?
I absolutely understand the question and I understand the space because I have worked in environments where we are looking for that low-hanging fruit, as you mentioned. And for me, the one thing that all schools can do is look to creating a shared language. And I believe the VIA character strengths can be that language. So 24 character strengths under 6 virtues that all humans embody. Starting with that language is incredibly powerful. And it can be done at a whole school level, like we have done, or it can be done in microcosm. I know there are communities that are just touching base with strengths in kindy, or perhaps they might start with year 6. It doesn't need to be a whole school approach. It can just be, let's get started. I really feel that if we can give our young people that language of strength, it's very surprising how quickly it can become embodied. And it can be, as you said, Tamara, spotted in other people. Our beautiful young people can be strength detectives, of course. I love how you mentioned before also that notion really of strength mapping. Once you start kind of thinking about what strengths we have in our classroom, then it becomes so much easier to tap into them. If we know, oh, there's creativity over there. Oh my goodness, there's curiosity, bravery, humour. And bringing that language in, I think, is incredibly powerful because I do believe that language is the greatest lever that we have to building not only our own wellbeing, but population wellbeing. I was very fortunate in my master's degree to work with Professor Lindsay Oates from the University of Melbourne, who's really the expert in the space of wellbeing literacy. And I've really held on to that language is the greatest lever that we have. So I would definitely start with language and trying to build that language just from the classroom all the way through. And I think that the strengths language is the way to do it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think strengths is just such a easy and sensible place to start, I think, when you're starting with the science of positive education. So, amazing. But Marnie, you've obviously tried a bit over the years, and there must be some stories where things didn't really work out that well. So can you maybe give us an example of something that didn't work, and you would discourage schools from trying to?
Oh, absolutely. We try things every single day, and trying to create context whereby there's a sense of safety, like psychological safety, is so important. So we encourage our students to give things a go. And so I give myself permission to experience that same truth, that if we fall, we know that we're trying, and we've just got to create those contexts whereby that's okay. So I've tried lots of things that haven't worked, but just to stick on that strength space, I think that what I'd like to mention is that I overplay my strengths constantly, as we all do as humans. I have my top 5 character strengths. I have love and kindness and perseverance, social intelligence, zest. So it makes sense for me to live my life through those strengths, but I'm also well aware that our capacity to overplay them is abundant. And I guess the example I can give before I really had the language of strengths is that when I was in my first teaching environment, I was harnessing my character strength of love, which is love is my number 1 strength. I was drawing upon love every single day, but without knowing it, I was overplaying it. And I wanted to take all my students home with me every day. And I probably spent the first 6 to 12 months in tears every single night, taking on that emotional trauma. And it took me a while to learn that's actually not my role. My role is to show up for my students, to sit with them in their struggle, to walk with them, but ultimately to hopefully model the skills that they could use in their own lives to help themselves to rise. That it's not my job to do that for them. So that overplaying of love is something that I'm aware of, overplaying of zest, overplaying of appreciation of beauty and excellence. But also it's been very powerful to use that as a model for my students then, to have those really raw, open conversations that it's okay. We have a lot of conversations sometimes with year 9 students about overplaying humour, overplaying bravery. What might that have looked like or felt like or sounded like for somebody else? So I guess that's something that I've learnt over time, just to be conscious of my own strengths and the absence of them, the excess of them, and how that might land for another human.
Yeah, and that's something I guess we don't explore enough often, strengths overuse. It's, we talk about, it's good to use your strengths and let's find opportunities to use your strengths. But like you say, when you're overplaying them, there can be negatives when you go past that golden mean moment, right?
It's so true. And sometimes, what you're left with is not golden. So, but it's a powerful conversation, to have with colleagues and young people. And I think like we were talking about with light and shade, that the sunshine and the storms, strength and struggle, it's actually okay if we don't get it right all the time. That's actually okay. That's where we learn. That's where we grow.
Yeah, I liken it to a comedy routine, right? So comedians go to all these backward places and just try out material that they're not sure if it's going to land or not. And they either ditch it or they hone it, right? So when they get to a big concert theatre and they've got a big audience, then they're nailing it and it sounds amazing and every joke lands. But that's only because they've tried and failed so many times, right?
That's exactly right. It's so true. And one of the things that I say to my students, we've just gone through an exam block, for example, and we talk about that matters, but we also talk about your mark is not your measure. And sometimes if students are feeling a little bit overwhelmed or emotional, I say to them, tell me about something hard that you've done in the past. I know you can do hard things. And we talk about the fact that you don't actually do hard things for that present version of yourself. You do that hard thing for a future version of yourself. So you can look back on it and say, I did that. What were the strengths that I drew upon? I can do that again now. So as you're saying, it's really important to do the practice and to have the falls, and hopefully you'll have people around you that love you and that support you and that will prop you back up.
I love what you're saying there. And I think something that came to mind as you were talking, because we started with literacy and then moved to strengths, is how important it is for everybody to be on the same page with their understanding of what a strength means. I had a parent who talked about her daughter, and she couldn't understand why her daughter, who tested top strength social intelligence didn't have any friends. And I said, okay, what do you think social intelligence means? And she said, I think it means you have lots of friends. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly it. It might look like that in one context, but actually her social intelligence could move her away from a friend group that aren't very positive for her. And so having that common language of understanding that just because we hear a word doesn't necessarily mean we get what that common use of it is. And so really starting with those kindies and building that language so that it's just part of how you talk about what's right with you and what's right with others feels really important.
Yeah, it's so true, Tamara. I was just thinking about, again, Professor Lindsay Odes and this magnificent work that he's been doing with UNESCO and reimagining the United Nations Sustainability Goal for Education, and just the power of language around that, and thinking about the aim of education is actually now to enable human flourishing. It's no longer to develop human capital. That is such a significant language shift that will have, I can't even imagine, the seismic impacts. And so for us in education, but just as a human, the power of language, yet again, is our greatest lever to build population well-being. And I think it's incredibly exciting to think that that's the aim of education, to enable human flourishing. But if we don't have that shared language, whether it be strengths or whatever it might be in a particular school context, if we all don't have the same understanding, then anything we try to do to increase well-being is not going to work because we all don't have a shared conceptualization of it. So even if I'm asking students to do a gratitude intervention, they all need to have a shared understanding of what gratitude is. So building that shared language, I feel, is incredibly important. I say to my Year 9 students, of course Shakespeare's tricky. We just need to do more of it. It's a foreign language. So it's really important that we build that language together, that it's a co-created shared experience.
Yeah, Marnie, you talk about how, the education environment is great to build wellbeing practices and literacy. One organisation in particular that's trying to push that agenda forward is the Positive Education Schools Association, or PESA, here in Australia.
Yes.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about the role of PESA in keeping that momentum?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate that our school has been a member of PESA for many years now, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to attend some of their annual conferences, and I've actually seen you there before, Jason, and had a little chat. I think we're very fortunate that we have a professional organisation, a body that draws upon best practice wellbeing science and also engages with world leaders in the space to be able to bring to the forefront some of this information, not only to schools like mine, the one that I'm in now, that does have a platform for wellbeing. My role, Head of Positive Education, doesn't exist everywhere. It's very important that there is an organisation that has reach to every student. I keep mentioning population wellbeing. So I think it's incredible as a resource, but it's so much more than that. It's all the humans behind the resource that are there to support, to help, to motivate people in their contexts. And I think that point is important too, that PESA talk about the importance of context and shaping a wellbeing strategy that works for your context. So they have incredible resources whereby you can have a look at what other schools are doing and that you can ask for support. So that the website is just full of rich resources, but also it's just the humans behind that. I just had the wonderful opportunity in the last school holidays to go to Ravenswood School for Girls and actually to present a workshop at the Positive Education Schools Association annual conference. And the chair, Anne Johnson, does such an incredible job of not only promoting positive education, but it's wellbeing science and population wellbeing more broadly. And the role that we have in schools is incredibly important in spreading that word. So we're very fortunate here at Newcastle Grammar that we are a member of such a wonderful organisation.
Yeah, and there's obviously been some amazing people, like you say, behind PESA, like Simon Murray and, the people at Geelong Grammar School, like Justin and David, and, there's so many people that have put so much effort into that on a voluntary basis, right?
Absolutely.
But if you speak to Anne again soon, tell her we're trying to get her on the podcast. So it would be apply some peer pressure on her.
I'll pass it on. Absolutely, your listeners would love to hear from her, I'm sure.
Yeah, she's amazing. I really rate her. I don't know if I I remember that PISA conference, actually. They had Ando, who I thought was interesting as a wellbeing speaker, but he was absolutely amazing. And he was actually, he resorted to tears in the end, because he was just overwhelmed by these teachers and thinking about teachers that he'd had in his life. I remember that so vividly. It was amazing, right?
I remember that too, Jason. It's incredible. I teach positive education, obviously, as well as English. And one of my year 8 Pos Ed classes, we start our lesson with reading from Ando's The Happiest Refugee. That's the way we start our lessons. We come together and we read and we talk about strengths and we talk about what lessons we can gain from that experience. So I totally get that, Jason. I was really moved by his keynote.
I remember when we travelled to Texas, where I met Tamara for the first time. I went to the IPEN conference there, and Anne was in the travelling group of us Australians, right, that all kind of hung out together. And I likened her to Ando in that she just seems to have this amazing backstory and has done so many different things. So, yes, big fan of Anne. Anne, if you're listening, come on the podcast, please.
Well, and I want to say for people who aren't in Australia, because I think often it feels like Australia and then the rest of the world. And you have created this community that I don't think has been well replicated anyplace else. And so, number one, people from other places can access all the PISA resources. They're online and available. So you don't have to be Australian to take advantage of the opportunities that PISA has. And you can build your own version, whether it's an iPen or another community of schools that come together. I've seen examples of this in Ontario where 5 schools kind of created their own hub because they didn't have a PISA. And so I think that is one of the things that having a whole school well-being, you can still feel like you're in a silo. You can still feel like it's just us doing this, and making those connections to other schools so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you can learn from mistakes and successes is so important.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And as I said, we're a PISA affiliated school, but also being a visible wellbeing school, we also have that wonderful connection as well. You gave the example of we were talking about Anne and Ravenswood. That's another example of a visible wellbeing school. So we're very fortunate being a partner school that we have the richness of those connections through PISA and through visible wellbeing. So I totally get that reaching out to others is so powerful. We're actually trying to take our positive education approach and what we know about wellbeing science beyond our school, not only to other schools, but to our community. I know you mentioned right at the start, Jason, to me that you were in the organisational psychology space, and we've started thinking about organisations and what can we do with organisations or with businesses, with the community to spread this amazing word. So we actually launched a Wellbeing for Breakfast series this year where we've been out in the community having breakfast with businesses and trying to bring some of the science and make it come alive for them. And it's just been incredible. That was actually the workshop that I presented at the PISA conference. I've been blown away. We've got tables of recruitment companies, tables of lawyers, mining companies just coming along to learn about the science of wellbeing. So I think that it's there's definitely a hunger for it, and it's not going away. It's very important that we give people that language and they can then take it back to their organisations.
I think that just takes it to the greater community. So again, kind of going back to where we started, that you're feeling good and you're functioning well and you're doing good. And so it's that external facing step that really hits it home. And so a question I like to ask our guests is, if you're having success, and honestly, from the sounds of it, it sounds like you're already having great success. If I step into your school, and I've never been in a visible wellbeing school, I've never been in a school that has a head of positive education, and your school is feeling good and functioning well and doing good, how will I know? How will I know that walking into your school?
I think that wellbeing is definitely an embodied whole person experience, and definitely we feel it and we see it in our students. But to go back to what I've been saying, it's actually about language, that you would hear it in the language of our students, of our staff, of our parents and our wider community. because I'm just such a firm believer that wellbeing exists in language. I so often hear students, community members say to me that actions speak louder than words. I challenge that every time. That it starts with words, that words matter, a shared language matters. So I think that if you walked through our school, that you would see, hear and feel flourishing in language. But I also would bring it back to that you would also see strength and you would also see struggle, because a flourishing school will have both of those experiences every single day. It's that beautiful symbiotic relationship. So ultimately, my hope would be that our young people can live their truth, and that you would see a whole range of gorgeous humans doing things differently, harnessing different strengths, showing up in different ways, living their truth.
Yeah, amazing. Marnie, we're obviously on a podcast today.
Yes.
And I know your colleagues, you said, are very excited about you being on a podcast today. So I'm sure...
I was trying to keep them out of my door. Since you've been talking to me, I've had 5 people come up to my door giving me a wave. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's one of the ways that we can tell that, the school is flourishing. There's so much support for you, knowing that you're on a podcast. They're interested. They're encouraging. That's amazing.
It's lovely. Thank you. Actually, my beautiful deputy head of school, Dr. Alan Parsons, at our last wellbeing breakfast, we were talking about active constructive responding. And he was talking to the audience about just what you were saying, Jason, about how do people respond when you do something well? When do you actually want people to be there for you? And of course, their hands go, well, when you fail, you want people to be there for you when you get it wrong. You want people to be there for you when you hit rock bottom. Actually, we want people to be there for us to celebrate as well. We want people to be there for us when we do things really well. So I think that's a powerful message too, that it's actually not about tall poppy. It's not about not being humble. It's just about a shared human experience and just getting on board that human in the highs and the lows, through the light and the shade.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? There's definitely a difference in culture in, say, the US versus Australia. Like you say, we have tall poppy syndrome over here. So if anyone, is successful, then we try and cut them down and bring them back. Whereas in the US, they tend to celebrate, athletes and, performers and that sort of thing. So I think we need to do more of that in Australia and celebrate with those people that are successful.
Yeah, I think so. Just that whole kind of unfinished sentence, will you be there for me when things go well and when things don't go well?
Absolutely. Now, because we're on a podcast, Marnie, we like to explore, what are our guests listening to, if you are listening to podcasts. Is there anything on your current list of podcasts?
Do you know what? I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I can't even give you anything. I am a prolific reader.
Yeah.
Being an English teacher, and also just having done the masters for a few years, I feel like I've spent the last 5 years reading, and being an English teacher too. I think I might have just mentioned Shakespeare. I just finished reading Macbeth for the 8th time, and but next to my bedside table, I'm just that cliched English teacher where I've got so many books I haven't read. But I think definitely also as we've emerged from the pandemic, the book that I've recommended the most, anything by Matt Haig, anything by Brene Brown, and the comfort book was something that gave me incredible comfort and that I continue to give to people because it's just so beautiful and life affirming. So I'll definitely be getting on board your podcast though, Jason and Tamara.
That's what we like to hear. We'll have you back.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
It's interesting because storytelling can happen through a book or it can happen through a podcast. And I was listening to someone talk about storytelling and really saying there's not an ending to it. It's more of a game that you're playing when you're telling the story of your life, when you're unpacking the story of the obstacles you overcome in school or at work, that it just keeps going. There isn't an end game. And the themes to the stories included stories of basic kind of Maslow level overcoming, food, shelter. But then beyond that, going to the tall poppy that we were talking about, stories talk about status. And it's interesting how we tell those stories differently depending on our cultural context. And then lastly, our stories talk about relationships. And I think I love that we talked about all of those things in our conversation today. We really came full circle, whether it's through a book or a podcast. We're telling our stories and sharing them.
Yeah, it's so true. And whether it be stories of struggle, I love stories, I love poetry, coming of age stories, they're just so powerful, and they're really the portal through which we make meaning of our lives. And again, it implies a shared understanding. My English students hear me say every single day, those sociocultural constructs within which we all exist, we need to challenge them. We need to think about words and what do they mean, and really think about the use of those words. So, I think that's really powerful. I love that notion that stories are the lens through which we live our lives.
And you're right, those words are powerful. And I think today's students, perhaps more than any other student class in the past, are more aware. They're certainly more aware of words and their power than I am. And I'm constantly checking in with today's youth to see what does this word mean, and what's the right word for this, because they have language that's evolved. And I think that's something brilliant when we go back to the well-being context, making sure that the words that we're choosing are relatable by today's students.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, there's that simple notion around positive psychology interventions of do no harm. That's a really important one to keep in mind. But also, language evolves. It wasn't all that long ago that I walked into my year 11 class and it was, yes, Queen. And I said, okay, what does that mean? Is that a compliment? Should I challenge you on that? So, and then language is evolving. We know that. My students find it fascinating to know that it wasn't all that long ago that bootylicious wasn't in the dictionary. And I said, it wasn't really a word before Destiny's Child or Beyonce or whoever it was. So it's pretty powerful.
Well, I think we're just about at the end of our podcast. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you if there's anything else that you really want to share with our audience before we finish.
Not really. I just love what I do, and I feel incredibly lucky, very, very grateful to be able to show up for my beautiful community every single day and make wellbeing visible. I really feel that relationships are central to who we are, and language is the greatest lever that we have to make connections. So I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you for allowing me to talk about our strengths-based approach and the way that we inform what we do with wellbeing science, and for letting me wear my rainbow dress.
Anytime, Marnie. You can wear that anywhere. You really rock that rainbow dress. So.
Thank you, Jason.
We're so inspired by your rainbow dress. Next episode, Jason, I want to see you wearing something that embodies your well-being. Forget the picture. I'm expecting big things from our next time together.
No, I am doing something for my well-being. I'm wearing something comfortable that I wear every single day, so I don't have to think about it. One less decision, yes.
Yeah, you have jobs, right?
To keep well-being, you've got to meet people where they're at. I'm at Rainbows, and you're at a blue polo shirt, and that works for both of us and our well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well done. And I think with that, we'll draw to a close while chalk one up for Jason. Thanks, Marnie.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I hope you have a gorgeous day.
Thank you so much. You were a wonderful guest, and we've learned so much. And I know that our listeners are going to be going back and grabbing all of those nuggets and wondering, okay, what is ACR and what is... So thank you for sharing your knowledge. Anyone who wants to see the outfit, please go to Flourish DX YouTube, and alternatively, you can find us any place that you listen to your podcasts. So please share us with a friend. We are all on LinkedIn, and you can find us there, and we'd love to connect with you there. And I think that's it for today. So until our next episode, please keep flourishing at school and in life.
You've been listening to the Flourishing at School podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on whole school mental health, follow Flourish DX School on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Flourishing at School podcast at www.flourishingatschool.com.